Hey guys, Tyler here. In a previous video, I analyzed the first 4 seasons of Star Trek Lower Decks, and it was 2 hours long. When I was editing that behemoth, I didn't know that the subsequent season, Season 5, would be the show's last, and neither did the people who make the show until April 2024, when Paramount decided to cancel Lower Decks. In an October 2023 interview with Cinema Blend, Lower Decks creator Mike McMahon told fans not to assume it was a guarantee the show would continue forever, especially after Paramount canceled Star Trek Discovery. That said, McMahon did confirm Season 5 was written as the end of a chapter he wanted to tell, setting up potential spin-offs and backdoor pilots, as well as introducing new characters. Lower Decks Season 4 finale had me on the edge of my seat, so I was excited to see the conclusion of this surprisingly good animated comedy. The question is, though, did Lower Decks' 5th season stick the landing? In this video, I'll attempt to answer this question while also cataloging Season 5's contributions to the overall lore of the Star Trek franchise. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Architects of Fate. Hey, are you looking to build an adventure with friends? Well, I just might have the place for you. Architects of Fate is a Twitch channel that specializes in tabletop RPGs with an emphasis on interactive gameplay and storytelling, all for free. Just by jumping into chat, you can make the lives of the game master and players easier or harder. It's up to you. Not only do Architects of Fate play well-known RPGs like 5th edition D&D, but they also play less common RPGs like Star Trek, Star Wars, Conan, Aliens, and more, plus totally original games like Solar Patrol, and Bad Horse's Evil League of Evil with the two-headed DM. Architects of Fate even has community game nights with chat. They're always looking for new games to share with each other and invite you to play alongside them. The goal of each stream is to make sure every viewer and player gets their chance to contribute and shine. If you like Star Trek, check out Bajor Rising on Mondays, featuring an ad hoc team of junior officers on the Galaxy-class USS Odyssey. Players embark on official and classified missions in support of Bajoran independence during the Cardassian occupation. They discover the prophets may not be mythical, and another greater enemy may have plans for the sector. Join in to help weave tales of covert operations, moral dilemmas, and the struggle for freedom. Thanks to viewer requests, Architects also has a new adventure story on alternating Mondays called Back in Business, featuring Ferengi traders making their way in a post-Dominion War galaxy under the edicts of Nagus Rom.
Grand Nagus.
Fans of Lower Decks who enjoy yelling at the TV might enjoy Cookie Trek, streaming every Friday. Hosts and chat collaborate as a writer's room to craft original, often hilarious, Trek-inspired stories that draw from the entirety of Trek lore. This season explores the exploits of the newly christened Florida-class Starbase, Starbase Tallahassee. Started in early 2019 by Chief Architect Nat Too Shabby, Architects of Fate continues his family's tradition of tabletop gaming and late-night storytelling by sharing the experience with everyone. So, come watch and join a group of players to write new stories and forge new friendships. Architects of Fate can be watched live on Twitch or rewatched on YouTube at the links in the description below. Big thanks to Architects of Fate for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get started. Before I dive into the season premiere, I want to take a minute to discuss the production of Season 5. Typically, previous seasons of Lower Decks have been written roughly from early spring to late summer, early fall of the year before episodes air. When Paramount ordered the 5th season in March 2023, writing had begun by then, and McMahon was writing the season finale by October. However, as keen observers will note, there was a major event that occurred smack dab in the middle of that period, during summer of 2023. The Writers Guild of America strike, and concurrently that summer, there was also the SAG-AFTRA strike, which lasted into November. Though animated series were not covered by the SAG-AFTRA strike, meaning the cast were allowed to continue recording, they chose not to out of solidarity with their fellow actors on live-action series. After the strikes ended, recording resumed, and voice of Beckett Mariner, Tawny Newsome, completed her work by February 2024, save for some additional dialogue recording, which I'll discuss more extensively later on. Newsome assured fans the recording delays would not impact the season's overall production schedule, as the show had been ahead of schedule when the strikes began. McMahon also wanted to bring some characters from Star Trek Enterprise onto the show, inevitably with the use of time travel, given Enterprise is a prequel series. By October 2023, he had entered negotiations with some Enterprise actors to reprise their roles in Season 5, and Harry Kim actor Garrett Wang would reprise his role from Star Trek Voyager. Voyager. Trailers for the season were released between July and October 2024 and confirmed suspicions that Tendi would return to the Cerritos following her departure at the end of Season 4. As I always strive to do with these retrospectives, I'll try to avoid just giving straight plot summary and focus on original analysis. That said, I'll obviously refer to the events of the episodes to provide background context for our discussion. And naturally, this will include plenty of spoilers, so if that's something you care about, you've been warned. Season 5's first 2 episodes, Dos Cerritos and Shades of Green, effectively function as a 2-part premiere. Just as the final shot of Season 4 featured Tendi delivering the season's closing line, we get to see Tendi doing some Orion pirating in Dos Cerritos' opening scene. Except she's not comfortable letting her crew kill, foreshadowing a confrontation about her apparent abandonment of Orion pirating customs in favor of her Starfleet principles. The season's main underlying arc is also introduced in this episode, which involves quantum fissures leading to parallel universes. The Cerritos falls into one of these fissures and encounters a duplicate from one of these realities, captained by none other than Mariner herself, who goes by Becky Freeman. Evidently, Mariner is Beckett's middle name, a nod to Mike McMahon's sister, Beckett Mariner McMahon. Becky runs a tight ship, having assumed command after an incident that led her mother Carol to be transferred to the notorious Starbase 80. This reality possesses a number of other differences as well. The uniforms are slightly darker, a few characters have different hairstyles, Billups is King of Hesperia, T'Lyn says remarkable instead of fascinating, and Rutherford's cybernetics are far more extensive. Tendi also permanently left Starfleet to become a full-time pirate, which led Alt Rutherford to completely erase her from his memories. Prime Rutherford is horrified to see what Tendi never coming back could potentially do to his psyche, which is already fragile as he's been working himself to death in her absence. Boimler also steals a pad from his counterpart and begins to model himself after himself, which ignites a running conflict throughout the season. And his behavior is indicative of an issue that some people have had with the character writing in Season 5. As we begin to see in Shades of Green, in his quest to improve his chances of ranking up, Boimler embraces a more relaxed style while Mariner has grown into a more natural leader. This is something of a reversal from how the characters began in Season 1. Mariner was always the loose cannon, and Boimler was the butt kisser. Mariner's character growth is particularly rewarding given her history of insubordination, especially with the context of her reaction to Cedo Jax's death as revealed in Season 4's The Inner Fight. But for many fans, it feels like Boimler regressed in Season 5. After losing his promotion to the Titan in Season 2, suffering the consequences of his bold Boimler arc in Season 3, and coming into his own in Season 4, there's a sense that he hasn't learned his lesson yet. This is somewhat to be expected for a cartoon character, but one of the more satisfying aspects of Lower Decks is how it's treated character growth with a level of seriousness that in some ways exceeds the depth of the live-action series. Going back to Tendi, for instance, I'll get into later how she's arguably underutilized this season, but she does kick ass quite a bit in the first 2 episodes. There's a wide consensus that her stories have served as some of the best fleshing out of Orion culture in the entire franchise, and the evolution of Devana's relationship with her younger sister is a great example of that. When we first meet D'Erica in Season 4's Something Borrowed, Something Green, she appears rather resentful of her sister leaving Orion for Starfleet. Indeed, Devana has, for years, had to deal with not only stereotyping of Orions from outsiders, but accusations of being a traitor from some of her own people. But we see this resentment is more of a facade, and D'Erica still deeply admires her sister, even though D'Erica has been tasked with being their family's prime, a high-ranking title usually held by the eldest daughter. This admiration even extends to Tendi's crew, who don't like killing either, and were trying to prove themselves as worthy pirates to the mistress of the Winter Constellations. And even though D'Erica forces Devana to return to Orion in exchange for helping rescue Mariner from Nick Locarno's Nova fleet, D'Erica maintains her admiration by keeping her pregnancy a secret. This is because her daughter, Devana's niece, will inherit the title of Mistress of the Winter Constellations, and under Orion law, Divana would be required to stay to train her. But as D'Erica knows how much Starfleet means to Divana, she could never make her stay permanently, even after Divana finds out. Many of these revelations come to light as House Tendi is engaged in a war with members of House Azure, composed of blue-skinned Orions, who were first seen in the animated episode The Pirates of Orion.
It's pronounced Orion!
The Blues are a patriarchal subset of the Orion species, and their animosity with their green-skinned matriarchal counterparts is put on display in both episodes. I talk more about the intricacies of Orion history and society in another video, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already. The war between the houses draws ire from the Pirate Queen, not to be confused with my Pirate Queen mommy, but the female leader of the Orion Syndicate. She challenges both houses to a solar sail race, and the losing house will have their wealth confiscated. Dialogue in this episode confirms that, while the Orions no longer use solar sail ships, they did centuries ago, much like the ancient Bajorans. After the Blue Orions sabotage the Tendi's sail, Divana uses her Starfleet ingenuity to devise a way to get back at them that compromises the prize both houses are after. This doesn't please the Pirate Queen, who confiscates both houses' wealth. The Tendis are no longer the fifth most powerful family in the Syndicate. Divana and D'Erica's parents don't seem to take it too harshly, and after returning to the Cerritos, Divana comes up with an idea to get her family back on their feet. Upon learning of the crew's recent mission aiding Targalis 9 in its transition away from capitalism, Freeman delivers loads of defunct Targalan currency to D'Erica's possession. House Tendi now operates as the official waste removal service for the Federation's newest member planet. The confirmation that replicator technology is central to Earth's post-scarcity economy comes as no surprise to a lot of fans, but it does serve as a noteworthy addition to the ongoing debate about how human society works in Star Trek. I say Earth and human because we know for a fact that various other member planets of the Federation still practice capitalism, such as Ferenginar, while others still at least use traditional currency, like Beta Z and Belarus 9. But while much of the dialogue in Shades of Green surrounding this issue can come off as kind of on the nose, I for one welcome this kind of rhetoric in modern media. That's right, inject some of that early TNG Roddenberry-approved anti-capitalism straight into my veins. Tendi's arrival back on the ship at the end of episode 2 didn't particularly come as a surprise to me, especially since, like I said, the season trailers showed her participating in Starfleet missions. But one argument I've seen shared around in Lower Decks fan discussion circles is that the writers should have extended Tendi's pirating arc for more episodes, possibly even half the season. The purpose of this would have been to further explore the ramifications of burgeoning Federation Orion diplomacy. I said towards the end of my previous Lower Decks video that Tendi might have been given a Starfleet secret ops mission in Orion territory, which would have definitely been an interesting storyline. But looking back, the fact that her time on Orion is strictly of a personal nature is actually still very appropriate for the show. There's a sentiment among some people that Tendi's relatively quick return to the Cerritos cheapens her sacrifice at the end of season 4 and proves Lower Decks lacks stakes. However, I have to disagree with this. As much as fans understandably complain about the stakes in shows like Discovery being galaxy-wide, the idea that the season 5 premiere lacks stakes is demonstrably false if we focus in the right place. Sure, many of Freeman's diplomatic accomplishments are noteworthy, first contacts with various species, uncovering the Pac-Led plot, etc. But since Lower Decks is about junior officers, Tendi's return to Orion not being tied to some grander scale diplomatic endeavor is arguably more realistic. I mean, she said it herself in the season 4 finale.
This is something I have to do for myself.
I also think it's necessary to point out that, given the show's formula, this is kind of always how it was going to go. Boimler left at the end of season 1 only to return shortly after, and Freeman was arrested at the end of season 2 only to return in the season 3 premiere, grounded. I don't think that a show like Lower Decks having a formula is an inherently bad thing, because it can still be used as a vehicle to tell interesting stories. But Tendi is a main character, and having her separated from the other main characters for an extended period of time would disrupt the show's formula, and it could potentially be confusing for marketing purposes given Lower Decks' episodic format. This isn't to make excuses for Paramount or to say it's just a comedy, because I think holding Lower Decks to a lower standard isn't the answer. But personally, I think Dos Cerritos and Shades of Green do their jobs effectively. In fact, I kind of consider them, as a two-parter, to be among the stronger season premieres of the entire show. Lower Decks' first episode, Second Contact, does establish some important lore and character information, but it's also kind of a mess, and the beginning of what I think is the show's weakest season. The Season 2 premiere, Strange Energies, is important for developing Tendi and Rutherford's friendship, but also has some cringy moments. Season 4's premiere, Tuvix, is just a Voyager member berries fest. To me, the Season 3 premiere, Grounded, is Lower Decks' finest season premiere and is one of my personal favorite episodes overall. It has a stronger plot than many of the other season premieres. Being Earthbound is a nice change of pace, and stealing a Phoenix replica from a theme park in Bozeman, Montana to break into the Cerritos and find evidence to exonerate Captain Freeman, now that's funny. Like I mentioned earlier, the Season 5 premiere still has some humor that's a little forced, but I think it works overall. I've mentioned several times on my channel that not all of Lower Decks' humor lands for me, but I do recognize that being a comedy, one of the writer's chief goals is to try and make people laugh. But I honestly liked that Season 4 in particular toned down some of the humor to focus on character development. But does the rest of Season 5 succeed in that regard? Well, to answer that, first I need to conclude my recap of Rutherford's arc in the season premiere. Shades of Green elaborates further on Rutherford's attempts to distract himself before Tendi comes back. Now, I know one officer who could have helped Rutherford make some holodeck programs to address that. Whereas his sleep-deprived appearance from the previous episode is no longer present, he still misses his friend. And picking up on this, T'Lyn decides to try and socialize with Rutherford and engage in some of the activities he and Tendi do together. Chief among these is repairing the shuttle Sequoia, which is sat broken in one of the Cerritos' repair bays since the series' first episode. After T'Lyn completely fixes Sequoia, Rutherford becomes upset as the repair process itself was what he and Tendi did to pass time. So, in a perfect demonstration of T'Lyn's comedic value to the show, she completely dismantles Sequoia so that Rutherford and Tendi can start from scratch.
Oh no, whatever shall we do?
Some have said that Rutherford's grappling with Tendi's absence resolves too quickly, although I think it's more nuanced than that. While he acts more level-headed in Shades of Green than Dos Cerritos, having somewhat come to terms with the fact that Tendi will come back when she comes back, it's what happens after the premiere that's more worth scrutinizing. Even though the writers didn't know that Season 5 was going to be the last season of the show when they were writing it, they did use Season 5 as an opportunity to tie up some loose story threads. A major example of this is Episode 3, The Best Exotic Nanite Hotel, which attempts to resolve the unresolved storyline of Mariner and Jennifer's romance. Jennifer Sharayan, an Andorian ensign aboard the Cerritos voiced by Lauren Lapkus, best known for Orange is the New Black, has been in Lower Decks since Season 1 as a background character. But after a series of adversarial encounters between the two in Season 2, Mariner and Jennifer began to date. The apex of their relationship arc arguably occurs in Season 3's Here All Trust Nothing, which is also important for Tendi and Rutherford's friendship as she comes out to him as a former Syndicate assassin. But after Mariner is temporarily transferred to Starbase 80 at the end of Season 3, for the entire 4th season, Jennifer doesn't show up at all, save for a few background appearances. While Season 4's story arc involving Nick Locarno and the legacy of Nova Squadron was, in my opinion, really tight, I do think it was kind of an oversight of the writers to leave Jennifer out of the picture for an entire year, basically. In-universe, this is explained as Mariner refusing to talk to Jennifer for that long after she returned to the Cerritos, but as a consequence, the two never officially broke up. Jennifer takes it upon herself to pretend to pick back right up where they left off and essentially tries to gaslight Mariner on an away mission. I know that a lot of people think that my generation likes to overuse the term gaslighting, but that's kind of what it was. Of course, this comes to a head when Jennifer finally confronts Mariner and forces her to have that uncomfortable conversation about receiving the silent treatment for a year. The two play the blame game before making their breakup official, as Jennifer is about to transfer to the USS Manitoba, a ship crewed mainly by Andorians, get it? 'Cause Manitoba is in Canada and Canada's cold. I thought it was funny. This is their final mission together. This is not to say the episode condones Jennifer's behavior, as both have something to apologize for. Mariner owns up to her failure to talk with Jennifer like an adult, and Jennifer apologizes for pulling this little stunt. But Jennifer says she's always been attracted to Mariner because she's so bad. She didn't even consider Mariner might have been innocent when she was transferred to Starbase 80 for supposedly throwing her mom under the bus during a Federation News Network interview, even though she was the lone voice of praise of Freeman's command style. But now that Mariner has matured a bit, that admission by Jennifer is pretty telling. That's another word that people think my generation likes to overuse. That's pretty telling.
Do better.
Do better. Yeah, you do better sucking my... As my generation does like to say a lot, yikes. What comes after yikes? Like...
It's like, usually if people say yikes, they're like, yikes, imagine doing that in 2020.
In 2020, in 2382. Like...
Imagine being anxious attached in 2382.
Anxious attached in 2382. To be clear, I also don't think it's inherently a negative thing to portray a relationship like this as being flawed. Star Trek has historically not had a lot of queer relationships, so Lower Decks providing opportunities to explore a relationship between Mariner and Jennifer was always welcome. But in pure episodic television fashion, the Best Exotic Nanite Hotel arguably rushes the development of this arc and concludes it in a very unsatisfying way. The perception that Lower Decks Season 5 mishandles its relationships doesn't end with Mariner and Jennifer, though. While not romantic in nature quite yet, the interactions between Tendi and Rutherford throughout the season can be, in a word, frustrating. While the series has continued to build up momentum regarding Rutherford's romantic attraction to Tendi and highlighted Tendi's relative obliviousness, this arc takes a massive backseat to other plots in Season 5. Lower Decks is episodic, yes, but it historically has done a better job of avoiding the reset button on plot development between episodes. In other words, Season 5 spends a lot of time, in my view, sort of dicking around with various one-off plots that fail to make the most of the time the series has left. Again, the go-to response whenever this is brought up, of course, is that when they were writing this season, they didn't know it was going to be the final season. But when you only have 10 episodes per season to tell necessary stories, how you spend that time matters. This isn't just a matter of wish fulfillment among people who ship these characters, because I've never actually felt strongly one way or the other, especially because Tendi is my wife. But since the series has been teasing will they won't they for 5 seasons, any failure to at least address this in earnest would be, in my opinion, irresponsible, especially given the writers did have an opportunity to go back in and make some changes to the scripts after the series cancellation was confirmed. We'll obviously get to how they conclude this thread in a bit, but for much of Season 5, Tendi and Rutherford are just kind of there. This lack of substantial screen time is particularly bad in the middle of the season, and even when the characters are on screen, sometimes they're given the most mundane tasks. While doing mundane tasks is in and of itself admittedly pretty typical of these characters given the show's format, previously it was more in service of making statements about Starfleet's hierarchy and these characters' place in the broader Star Trek universe. But Episode 4, A Farewell to Farms, relegates Tendi and Rutherford to aiding Dr. Miglimo in his quest to impress 2 scholars of his species with fine cooking. Miglimo's people invented warp travel to seek out strange new meals, as he puts it, and this is the ultimate test for him. To put it bluntly, this episode is kind of useless. While the A-plot sees Boimler and Mariner help Ma'ach regain his captaincy in an exciting visit to Kronos, the Miglimo plot is by far the weakest storyline the show's ever put out, in my opinion. I've never been a fan of the character, whose ineptitude is honestly the chief reason Tendi was forced to leave the ship for several months at the end of Season 4. I also found out recently that Miglimo's voice actor, Paul F. Tompkins, voices another annoying character in BoJack Horseman. A Farewell to Farms also confirms Miglimo's race is called the Cloacans. I wish I were making that up. Listen, I'm not one to sneer at innuendo. I sell merch with Tendi dressed up as a cowgirl, for God's sakes.
I love being married to my husband.
But this is the side of Lower Decks that's deeply unserious in a way that just doesn't work quite as well. Interestingly though, Episode 5, Starbase 80, is kind of a return to form. When the crew is forced to visit there to receive an upgrade to their navigational system, we get to see more of Starfleet's most run-down space station. And while Tendi, Rutherford, and even Boimler contribute to the plot much less substantially than Mariner, Starbase 80 is honestly one of the most Star Trek-ish episodes of the season. When faced with an infection by an anaphasic life form, much like Ronan from... Oh my god, it's Ghost Tyler! Here again to talk about his favorite episode, Sub Rosa. In Sub Rosa, after attending her grandmother's funeral on Caldos 2, Beverly Crusher is visited by a mysterious entity, the anaphasic life form called Ronan, who inhabits a candle her grandmother has kept lit for many years. As it turns out, Ronan has been preying upon the women in Beverly's family line for generations, and Beverly finally puts an end to this predation after coming to her senses. Thanks, Ghost Tyler. Anyway, when posed with the threat of this anaphasic consciousness, the crew uses their knowledge and experience to solve the scientific problem, leading to an understanding where both parties learn from each other. The station's chief medical officer, who himself is partially transformed by a Tarkanan parasite like Geordi was in TNG's Identity Crisis, ultimately identifies one of the Cerritos' beluga whales as Patient Zero, so to speak. Starbase 80 does a good job of humanizing the Starbase 80 crew, who previously were more of a joke. The episode treats them as underdogs, desperately seeking attention from the Federation to address some of the problems of their aging starbase, which hasn't seen many equipment upgrades since the 2260s. They still use wall comms, which is how they were able to avoid being infected by the anaphasic life form, which used the Cerritos crew's comm badges as a vector. Starbase 80 is also shared with the Akamarians due to a negotiation hiccup that ceded half of the station to their authority, likely a reference to TNG's The Vengeance Factor. While the plot of this episode is kind of recycled from the series premiere and the lack of T'Lyn is unforgivable, I kind of rate this episode higher than a lot of other people. But to me, it serves as one of the best examples of Lower Decks' function as a spiritual successor to TNG, in terms of an episodic entry. And it's important for Mariner's growth as well, as she comes to realize Starbase 80 wasn't her rock bottom. The station's about second chances. The heavier focus on Mariner this season isn't entirely unjustified, mind you. If there were a singular protagonist of the series, it would be her. And she's probably one of the best written, best acted Star Trek characters in recent history, her arc being one of the main reasons I even made my previous Lower Decks video. I actually like, on paper, that Mariner is starting to be viewed by the other characters as a more serious authority figure. She doesn't have to abandon her core personality to do this either, just be the best kind of Starfleet officer she knows how to be. That was the crux of some of her final words to Nick Locarno in Old Friends, New Planets, that while she often disagrees with orders, she still believes in Starfleet's fundamental mission. Even though Season 1 isn't my favorite, I've sung the praises of her critiques of Starfleet since 2020, when the Cerritos discovered the natives of Beta 3 had resumed obeying Landru after Kirk intervened in the TOS episode, The Return of the Archons. That was the catalyst for Freeman's proposal for Project Swing By, which petitioned Starfleet to check up on planets that haven't been visited in several years, since Beta 3 was classified as a known culture. Mariner's assertion that Starfleet is good at exploring, bad at maintaining, is probably one of the most important statements made by a Star Trek character in the TNG era. It not only shows some of the ramifications of Kirk and Picard's historic missions, but it also potentially adds context to some of the structural reasons the Federation overextended itself in the centuries leading up to the burn in Discovery.
In its desire to serve the many, the Federation ignored the needs of the few.
As I've said before, these kind of critiques of institutions are very important in today's climate where, let's face it, the United States, the world's dominant superpower, is kind of fucking falling apart. But okay, back on track with Season 5. Mariner's new role as a mentor of sorts blossoms in Episode 6 of Gods and Angles, in which she teams up with Ensign Ollie to help solve a mystery. The Cerritos is hosting peace talks between the inhabitants of the Veriflex Nebula, the orbs and the cubes, and a couple of their offspring are missing. You can pretty much guess where that leads. Ollie's backstory is also an allusion to the TOS episode Who Mourns for Adonais, as she is a Greek demigod, or to put it more scientifically, a human Olympian hybrid. She's the granddaughter of Zeus, and naturally she possesses powers involving electricity. She also explains that her laurel is not headwear, but a bioluminescent construct Olympians naturally possess. You can tell that Ollie was being set up as a new recurring character, although my concern is that if the show had gone on for more seasons, she would have competed with characters like T'Lyn and even some of the core main 4 characters for screen time. Of Gods and Angles is particularly egregious with its lack of important contributions from Rutherford and Tendi, who mainly react to Boimler as he attempts to get in good graces with T'Ana, whose book club Boimler's alt-universe counterpart is a part of. That said, this subplot does contribute to the funniest scene in the episode, which is also cathartic.
What do you want?
Nothing. What's crapping with you?
What did you just call me?
You know, 'cause you're a
You little... Your face!
Go, guys, help me!
Basic! I will you up!
Episode 7, Fully Dilated, in many ways does make up for Tendi and T'Lyn's relative lack of screen time this season, though it does have other problems. The episode sees the 2 characters compete for the senior science officer position aboard the Cerritos, an important development as it serves as the conclusion of an arc started all the way back in season 2, when T'Ana first recommended Tendi for senior science officer training. The 2, along with Mariner, are tasked with retrieving technology left on the planet Dilmer 3 by a purple alternate universe Enterprise D. The technology itself turns out to be Data's severed head, and Brent Spiner reprises his role as a more purple version of the android officer in this episode. Dilmer 3 is a pre-warp society, meaning Prime Directive protocols are in full force. As Boimler and Rutherford explain, when the 3 are beamed down to the planet, they'll experience time dilation. For every second that passes aboard the Cerritos, 1 week will pass on the planet. Boimler gives T'Lyn an amulet with a beacon to signal them to get where the locals can't see them before they're beamed out. Can you see where this is fucking going? In classic Season 5 Boimler fashion, he and Rutherford have brought elaborate micheladas into the transporter room, even though food isn't allowed in there. After the trio is beamed down, Boimler pokes himself in the eye and both spill their drinks on the console.
That was bad.
Remember a few seconds ago when I said that the team would experience time dilation? Yeah, well, in the time it took me to explain that, months have passed on Dilmer 3. Boimler and Rutherford rush to clean up their mess and transport their friends back, and when they do after the team has been on the surface for over a year, Tendi's response is completely understandable.
Boimler, what the hell happened?
The controls had a glitch?
Yeah, totally random, L-Cars issues.
But in their time on the planet, Tendi took her competition with T'Lyn to extraordinary levels. 4 months into the mission, she activates Data's head and consults him about science over the next several months while she attempts to build a transporter. Meanwhile, T'Lyn gains expertise in agriculture and develops beauty products to sell at a local market.
T'Lyn appears to be concerned with your well-being.
Yeah, well, she can afford to with her giant melons. I can't compete with that.
And Mariner tries to make friends in the town, only leading her to be thrown in jail on multiple occasions. Tendi later realizes that her forced competition with T'Lyn is rather childish, especially as T'Lyn was not even aware there was a competition. T'Lyn intends to revoke her application for senior science officer when they return to the Cerritos, but Tendi convinces her not to, and Data recommends they both be promoted together as a team. But now, Boimler and Rutherford owe them big time. I wish I could enjoy this episode more, especially since it's crucial to both Tendi and T'Lyn's character development, but it's frustrating that the episode's central conflict is ignited by Boimler and Rutherford acting like idiots. Also, this episode strikes me as having some logical issues, as a lot of the conversations and events on Dilmer 3 don't really feel like they line up with how long they've been on the planet. For instance, after 4 months, Mariner remarks,
"Guess it's safe to assume that we'll be here for a while."
"Why are you saying that 4 months into the mission and not like 8 days? And I know Tendy's been shut up in her room for a long time doing science, but it took until they were ready to be beamed back for her to have an honest conversation with T'Lyn, and Mariner and T'Lyn never knew Tendi had activated Data's head. Seems fishy to me. And the fact that Mariner never noticed the competition between Tendi and T'Lyn and never intervened is also not the best look, but I digress. But I do think this episode is also a good indicator as to the kind of psychological fortitude one must possess when serving in Starfleet, since being separated from the rest of your crew and friends for an entire year is a pretty big deal. Upper Decks flips the script by focusing on the senior officers for a change rather than the lower deckers, an inversion not only of the show's formula but also the TNG episode Lower Decks that inspired Mike McMahon to create the series. Upper Decks does feature some good character beats, like Shax continuing to deal with PTSD from the Cardassian occupation, T'Ana getting Nurse Westlake to test her pain tolerance, Ransom using his aloof reputation to get some junior officers to cooperate, and Ensign Meredith helping Billups conduct emergency repairs and engineering. It's the kind of episode that appears late in a show's run, and one that's still arguably earned, although it, by its very nature, still doesn't give the junior officers enough time to do anything meaningful and has no connection to the season's broader arc. However, in a vacuum, it is still entertaining, and I like that they have a moment where Miglimo offers to give Shax therapy, and Freeman getting to have an anniversary dinner with her husband, the Admiral, on the holodeck. And could the focus we get on some of the other officers in this episode besides the main 5 be setting up a potential spin-off? Who knows? More obvious opportunities for backdoor pilots and spin-offs seem to reveal themselves in Episode 9, Fissure Quest. The series' penultimate episode and part 1 of a 2-part finale, Fissure Quest largely follows Boimler's transporter clone William, who is the captain of a Section 31 ship crewed by a bunch of interdimensional castaways. These include a version of T'Pol, who was married to Trip Tucker for 63 years, a version of Curzon Dax, who never passed his symbiont on to Jadzia, a version of Elim Garrick, who is married to a hologram of Julian Bashir, and most notably, various counterparts of Ensign Harry Kim. They are not sparing any expense on these references. And speaking of expense, the guest star list for this episode is pretty remarkable. Jolene Blaylock, credited simply as her first name Jolene, reprises T'Pol. Anthony Robinson and Alexander Siddig reprise Garrick and Bashir. Wong reprises Kim, and Shax's voice actor Fred Tatasciore voices Curzon. Boimler's crew has been investigating the interdimensional rifts for months, and they run into not only an alternate version of Kim who has achieved the rank of lieutenant, but also a version of Mariner who works in engineering, and a presumably late 21st century crew of humans and Vulcans captained by Lily Sloan. Alfre Woodard returns from Star Trek First Contact to voice Zefram Cochrane's engineering partner. Except this Sloan is from a reality where humans never invented warp drive, but instead explored the multiverse with quantum drives aboard a ship called the Beagle. Sloan's perspective on exploration, that learning more about the human spirit is a chief aspiration, serves as a thought-provoking counter to the franchise's primary maxim of seeking out new life. It'll be interesting to see if the franchise continues to capitalize on this deconstruction, especially as we in real life are starting to set our sights on Mars and beyond. Personally, watching this episode was initially pretty frustrating, as Lower Decks fan service has never been its most compelling quality to me. For instance, I think the multiverse concept has become so incredibly stale in sci-fi in general, and no, William complaining about it too doesn't make it better. More than that though, Lieutenant Kim's obsession with giving his alternate selves a better life by hijacking the Beagle strikes me as being rather forced, although his plan being thwarted can be viewed as good commentary about being satisfied with one's present position in life. This is a lesson that Prime Boimler will have to learn in the finale in order to snap him out of the spiral he's been going down this season. I also have to say I'm not the biggest fan of the continuing normalization of Section 31 in Star Trek. Its depiction in DS9 as a rogue, extra-legal, extrajudicial entity that bends morals in the name of saving the Federation is much more interesting than what we've gotten in, say, Discovery. And the framing of recruitment of misfits to the organization, a motif present also in the trailer for the Section 31 film, doesn't quite sit well with me in an era when critiquing our institutions, like the CIA, on which Section 31 is clearly based, is paramount, no pun intended, in works of fiction and real-life political advocacy. One could see a potential effort to reform the organization in New Trek, and as a point of fan service, putting some version of Bashir in service of Section 31 is a realization of a common plot point in many Star Trek novels. And before anyone says anything about Garak and Bashir being married, just know that not only have Robinson and Siddig shown openness to portraying their characters this way, but Robinson realized from day one in his role that Garak's end goal was always going to be to fuck Bashir.
When I walked on set to do the very first scene with Sid, I saw Sid, and he was one of the most beautiful young men I have ever seen in my life. And I thought, wait a second. I want to f this guy. Forget about the spy shit. I have no idea what that means. That's no action.
You can't play that.
Now, they had no idea that this was
no idea.
Some back thoughts.
And Sid, God bless him, because the moment I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, he felt it, and he picked it right up.
But yeah, I found myself not being quite as impressed with these throwback characters as some other fans. I've stated for a long time that Lower Decks' reliance on references has never been my favorite part of the show either, and Fissure Quest is probably the biggest example of why some people dismiss the entirety of Lower Decks as just fan fiction with a budget. It makes it tougher for me to even defend Season 4, given that the main antagonist of that season is Nick Locarno, who of course was in the TNG episode The First Duty. Even Mariner herself has been accused of being shoved into canon inorganically because of her backstory, growing up on the Enterprise, serving on DS9, knowing Riker and Worf, etc. But that's also the point of her character. She's been around the block. She's seen and done all these things, been to all these places, known all these people, and still found herself demoted to ensign at the beginning of the show. As for Locarno, while his inclusion in Lower Decks is indeed a deep cut, it feels different from Fissure Quest and a lot of the other referential inclusions because there's a more compelling story reason for it. And it's not like the franchise hasn't done this before. One of the most beloved episodes of DS9, Trials and Tribulations, has the Defiant crew going back in time to thwart an assassination attempt against James T. Kirk. Some of the more highly rated episodes of TNG are the ones that include Scotty and Spock. Some people even like Star Trek Generations, which had the TOS and TNG crews in the same film. And one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, The Wrath of Khan, followed up on a character from a random one-off TOS episode, because the people who made The Wrath of Khan thought it was a story worth telling. And of course, one of my favorite arcs in Enterprise Season 4 features T'Pau, who was also in the original series. So fans do like callbacks, if they're done well. Including Locarno in Season 4 was kind of brilliant. Clearly what happened to him after he was kicked out of Starfleet Academy had consequences. But William Boimler's crew in Fissure Quest doesn't really do it for me. And I know from experience that one of my friends who hasn't necessarily seen all the other Star Trek shows definitely did not get much out of this episode. That matters because these characters' inclusion in this episode obviously impacted the viewing experience of somebody who considers themselves to be a more casual fan.
Like it was different with Armis being there.
Oh yeah. The Kim thing was just so stupid.
Weird. I was just like, why is this important?
In any event, when Lieutenant Kim's escapade results in a burst of energy that could threaten all realities, William's decision to channel that energy into the Prime Universe and entrust Brad and his friends to defuse this ticking time bomb will offer our Warp Core 5 one final hurrah in the series. The series finale, The New Next Generation, mostly delivers. When we see the energy burst first emerging into the Prime Universe, it is encountered by the Klingons, who fall victim to its effects, but much like the Klingons' encounter with V'ger in the opening of Star Trek the Motion Picture. We learn the dimensional rift is surrounded by a Schrödinger possibility field, which causes matter from the Prime universe to become altered into other possible quantum states. For instance, a Klingon officer is transformed to appear like the Klingon design from Star Trek Discovery, which I know some fans will pounce on as proof that Discovery isn't canon, even though that's obviously not what's going on here. But once we catch back up with our Boimler, his delivery of information about their impending doom to the captain is met with trust. This is great to see from Freeman in contrast to her relative dismissal of junior officers' perspectives and opinions earlier in the series, especially season 1. This whole crew has grown closer over the past few years, and in this moment, they've earned that trust in each other. With everything this episode is tasked to do, I think the new Next Generation balances everybody's screen time pretty effectively, including Ma'ak and his brother Malor. I'm glad Ma'ak is in this episode, as his presence in the inner fight was incredibly welcome, given how he helped Mariner stop feeling sorry for herself. It's also nice to see the lower deckers and senior staff work together again to focus on solving a problem in a crisis situation, and everybody does their part to save the day, harkening back a bit to the energy of the season 4 finale. Boimler snaps back to reality by breaking his alt-universe pad after realizing how much trouble it's caused everyone around him. A moment that made me say yes out loud. This episode also utilizes Ollie again, who, with the help of Meredith, uses her powers to disable a Klingon bird of prey's shields. And Rutherford ditches his implant after continuing to have compatibility issues with the Cerritos' systems. But while this episode's still exciting, not badly paced, has tighter dialogue, and checks the boxes it needs to check, it didn't necessarily blow my mind in the way season 4's two-part finale did. That said, the new Next Generation shakes up the status quo enough to set up potential sequel series and spin-offs. Unable to actually close the rift, Mariner pulls some tech wizardry to convert it into a stable wormhole, which Starfleet can now use to explore other realities. Starbase 80 is moved into the wormhole's orbit, and Freeman leaves the ship to oversee new missions beyond the rift with her husband. Ransom is promoted to captain and pits Boimler and Mariner in a competition for the XO position, setting up a conflict for a potential 6th season. Rutherford starts to more outwardly display his romantic affections for Tendi, and if you ask me, I think she's starting to as well. That's the heavy implication of this last scene anyway. I know some people have wanted to die on the hill of letting Tendi and Rutherford stay friends, but my take is, I don't know man, let the fictional characters just be in love. Boimler and Mariner fill the niche of the platonic male-female friendship anyway. All in all, I feel like this episode sticks the landing and ends on a rather upbeat, optimistic note of the adventure continues. But did it change my overall feelings on the season as a whole? As I've discussed throughout this video, even though I think Season 5 did succeed in technically checking a lot of boxes, the show still peaked with Season 4. Many of these latest episodes felt like they lacked some of the little moments that made previous seasons special, with numerous unserious plots like the Cloacan episode. But another reason I've continued to use the word frustrating is because this season is clearly necessary. It contains a lot of important character milestones, resolves cliffhangers, and ties up multiple loose threads. The impact of the strikes cannot be ignored either. I did the math, and Season 5 did appear to have the least amount of time dedicated to polishing its scripts. To be clear, Paramount is still ultimately to blame for forcing the strikes. When you're underpaid, you don't do your best work anyway. But even taking these strikes into account, most of the decisions the writers made this season would probably still exist. And while the actors seem largely satisfied with the directions their characters have gone, I still think it's fair to say that the writers made some mistakes. The finale being more balanced only makes up so much for how much time we've spent the rest of the season seeing characters like Tendi, Rutherford, and T'Lyn underutilized, with notable exceptions of the premiere and fully dilated. Ultimately, there is a part of me that is concerned that if the show had kept going, it would have overstayed its welcome, like Rick and Morty. But on the other hand, it is screwed up that Paramount cut the show short before the creators had time to fully flesh out the story that they wanted to tell. I do wonder if it would have been better for the events of Season 5 to be condensed into a 2-hour movie to trim out some of the fat, but I digress. We can only guess what parts of the season were added in at the last minute, even in episode 10's epilogue. Either way, even though I do think that the writing quality has started to dip, I am gonna miss this show, if for no other reason than It's new Star Trek, sue me. Seriously though, the experience of watching it and talking about it with friends and family has been a treasure. It's been speculated, of course, that Lower Decks could be picked up by another streaming service like Netflix, which happened with Star Trek Prodigy. The one difference is that Prodigy's second season was already nearly complete, whereas a new season of Lower Decks would have to be shored up from scratch. So I do think that, in all likelihood, Lower Decks is over for good, at least in its current iteration. But so much of the series has near infinite rewatchability, and in my opinion, its legacy will be reflected upon for years to come.
This is brand new for y'all, but people are gonna cosplay as your characters. That's gonna happen. You're gonna get invited to Star Trek conventions and you're gonna meet people who love this stuff in ways that you can only imagine.
It was the four of us, we were together on Zoom because it was the pandemic, but you were the person that said, welcome to the Star Trek universe. And that meant the world to us.
Probably the show's biggest contribution to canon is its fleshing out of Orions as a more serious matriarchal culture than what we got in the franchise previously. And the importance of what Tendi represents to the franchise shouldn't be overlooked. I have a whole video about that, by the way, so if you haven't watched that, link in the description. I also think the show has justified its place in canon just by its mere existence, being a show about junior officers. We haven't had anything like that before. Obviously, what you do with that premise is important, but in addition to Mariner's arc, plenty of one-off episodes have offered good meta commentary about Starfleet, about exploration, about humanity, you name it. Lower Decks, in my view, also proves that Star Trek thrives in animation. It's a vibrant depiction of the TNG era, taking advantage of more creative alien designs like the animated series. And its vibe and tone have been comforting to watch in the 2020s, while also delivering robust character development and maintaining the ethos of Star Trek. And speaking of the characters, there is a strong possibility that some of them may show up again in other future Trek installments. As others have pointed out, studios in the streaming era like to cancel series pretty often, but also greenlight new shows nearly just as often, so these characters' stories may be far from finished. Indeed, Tawny Newsome and Justin Simeon are developing a mockumentary-style series in the Star Trek universe set in the early 25th century, which would allow characters from Lower Decks and Star Trek Picard to appear. When asked if she'd appear as Tendi in live action, Noelle Wells has expressed openness, especially if she wouldn't have to don Orion makeup and could portray her character undercover as a human. So the possibilities are endless. But what are some of the potential spin-offs you guys think we could see? And which concepts are you most excited for? Maybe a show focusing on the Orions, the adventures of Riker and his crew on the USS Titan, or maybe a flash forward with one of the main characters as a captain. Oh, would you look at that? I happen to have an ongoing fan comic, Star Trek Endurance, featuring exactly that. Honestly, a show centering on the crew of the Anaximander is probably my least favorite option, and the finale setting up a potential Trek version of Marvel's What If is kind of concerning. But a sequel series to Lower Decks that continues the development of the Cerritos crew, that would probably be my favorite premise. Even though Lower Decks may not have been the most crucial series to my channel's growth, my life definitely would be duller without it. I'm sad we may never get to see more Divina Tendi, no more Lower Decks in general, but it's certainly been a fun ride. I didn't fully appreciate the series when it first premiered, but it's grown on me, and I still think it's one of the stronger Star Trek series, certainly the strongest entry of the Kurtzman era. I'm disappointed that this will also probably be the last Lower Decks retrospective video I make, because talking about the show with my audience has also been a blast. Season 5 might not have met all my expectations, but Lower Decks as a series has far exceeded them. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description. Or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. By becoming a patron or member, you get access to awesome perks like behind the scenes photos and videos, patron and member only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation, all are appreciated. Links to my PayPal as well as my social media and merch store are in the description too. Also, just as a reminder, I do have a second channel, OrangeRiver Plus, where I've uploaded the VODs of lots of my gaming streams, with more on the way. And in addition to some other goofy one-offs and extra behind-the-scenes content, I've officially made it my second streaming platform, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. And big thanks once again to Architects of Fate for sponsoring this video. That's all I have for this week. Now, I'm gonna go spend some time with my wife, Devon Attendee.
Captain's Log, Stardate 81003.85. Not only are the anomalies in local space appearing at an accelerating rate, but the USS Petrov seems to have disappeared in a wormhole.
I think we have a moral obligation to at least try to track them down. They could be hurt.
It's worth the risk. I'll send Endurance's Aero shuttle, but I'd like to request a shuttle from another ship to accompany her.